The Citizens Grand Jury is back in session, and there's a new overlay that I wasn't aware of before, but there it is. Larry, how are you today?
Hanging in there, like I've always said, as well as could be expected living under communism.
Absolutely. And we're going to be talking about that today. We're going to be taking a special look at the federal judiciary with a particular interest in the events that have happened around January 6th. Do you want to tell us what we're going to be going over today, Larry?
Right, Jason. It's time that we judged the judges. It's reached a critical point, critical mass. It's turned cancerous. And the epicenter of the cancer, where it's metastasized the most, is the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia and its appellate court, which is the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit. Highly partisan, highly leftist, but also with regard to Republican judges who are part of the establishment, who frankly fear for their own lives after they saw what happened on January 6th. And let's do a little recap of that. Is that January 6th was overwhelmingly the result of a recognition that there was corruption in all three branches of government. The final straw, the straw that broke the camel's back, was when the Supreme Court, including the judges who had been chosen, nominated, and confirmed during President Trump's administration, threw him under the bus and wouldn't even give him a hearing with regard to the very meritorious case that was brought by the Attorney General of Texas, where he was arguing that there was a dispute between the states with regard to the application of election laws, given what went on in various swing states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Wisconsin. Wouldn't even give him a hearing. And they were required to do that under our Constitution. This was a case of original jurisdiction, which would have gone directly to the Supreme Court. That was the trigger point. And it was also Congress. It was also Vice President Mike Pence at the time, who frankly was a coward and would not send the matter for an audit. He should have slowed everything down. He didn't have to rule that Biden had won or that Trump had won. Just slow it down. He had the authority to do it until we could really look at what happened. But it was essentially a recognition that our entire government has been lying to us for decades. And I go through that in my book, It Takes a Revolution. Forget the Scandal Industry, that you can get at freedomwatchusa.org and online at all major booksellers. And I go through the history of the deep state corruption in the executive branch, the court jesters, clowns, and criminals in the legislative branch, and the judicial hacks in the federal branch, which is the worst, because they were put on the bench to protect us from the tyranny of the other two branches of government. They were a safety valve. That was what they were intended to be, to protect us from that tyranny and overreach. And they became part of the problem. And as the biggest part of the problem, and as Jefferson said, unelected, unaccountable to the people, believing that they have lifetime tenure, which they really don't. They serve for good behavior. They can be removed for bad behavior, but Congress has only done it 7 times in 245 years, about once every 32 years, because they're all in bed together, literally, sometimes actually, given what goes on in Washington, D.C. It's become Sodom and Gomorrah. But since they do not protect us anymore, the American people rose up as Jefferson predicted they would someday, shedding the blood of patriots and tyrants yet again every 20 years. And he added, what's a few thousand dead to refresh the tree of liberty? That's the natural manure of the degradation of government. Now, he didn't want to see anybody hurt, and he didn't want to, neither do I, neither do you, and neither do most Americans, most good Americans. But he predicted what would happen if we went down this path. Jason, we're having a little bit of a video issue right now.
Yeah, I'm trying to mute. It's very important when our jurors join that they join muted, please. I have to chase these little microphones around to mute them. Sorry, okay. Larry, please continue.
All right. So that's the situation we find ourselves in. Now let's talk about specifically January 6th, because the corruption on the federal bench goes far beyond the judges that are so-called dealing with January 6th. January 6th, mostly peaceful people were in Washington to support President Trump. Many of them went up to Capitol Hill. Some of them entered into the U.S. Capitol, which is owned by the people of the United States. It's not owned, exclusively by the congressmen and senators that occupy it. So they may have trespassed in the Capitol at the time in terms of the prohibition on coming into the Capitol without going through security. But the dirty little secret is that the police let them in. Most of them let them in. There were a few that testified for the hack Democrats on Capitol Hill that wanted to make a name for themselves. But the police are generally on the side of the people, and so is the military. There was military in there at the time, retired military, perhaps even actual military. And most of them were overwhelmingly peaceful. Now, the left seized on this and called it an insurrection. It was not an insurrection. It was an uprising. And Jefferson predicted it. It could have been like the storming of the Bastille on July 4th, 1789, but it was not. That was bloody. That triggered the French Revolution, which, by the way, Jefferson was an architect of, among others. And as a result of that, the Biden-Harris regime, that's what we'll call it, a regime, as everybody else does these days who understands what's been going on, they turned the Justice Department into their own private Gestapo through Attorney General Merrick Garland, who's a complete hack. And we know what he did with the teachers, with the parents and the teachers, in Virginia and elsewhere, threatening them with FBI being sicked on them. So this is what happened. And about 700 have been rounded up. Some of my clients, client like Siaka Massaquoi, who was there peacefully, where they broke into his house at 5:45 a.m. in the morning with about 20 FBI agents in front of his best friend who had his children there, who had nothing to do with Washington, D.C. or January 6th, and handcuffed not just Siaka, but the father in front of the kids. Siaka asked to speak with, his lawyer. That was denied to him. That was prevented from him doing so. He was then interrogated by an FBI agent. They then seized his computer, his cell phone, his notebooks, everything he needs to do business, because he's a young budding actor, a talented actor in Hollywood, California. And Siaka is a, quote, bad example for the left and the Biden-Harris regime because he happens to be Black and he happens to be conservative and he happens to be a person of faith. And they hate that. On the other hand, he probably would have been arrested if he wasn't Black because they knew that would create a bigger issue. So he hasn't been arrested. He hasn't been charged yet. But when I went to go back to get his equipment for him so he could do business, I was told by the arrogant U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C., we'll give it back when we feel like it. So I brought a lawsuit, and this, is a segue into what's going on in Washington, D.C. as well. Class action. We brought a class action. A Democrat magistrate judge appointed during the reign of Donald Trump, believe it or not, by the name of Donahue. I forget her name right now. It's in the second edition of my book, which will be coming out in February. She, before the complaint was even served, and before we had a chance to respond, dismissed the complaint and dismissed it without prejudice. She was previously with the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Justice Department. And it was a case of political hackery, because when I was at Judicial Watch, and this case was brought against the FBI Director, Christopher Wray, the agent who violated the constitutional rights of my client, Siaka, and the other agents, and the Department of Justice. When I was at Judicial Watch, we sued the FBI Director, Louis Freeh, with regard to Notre Trulock, who was the energy investigator at the Energy Department, who uncovered that Wen-Ho Lee had given our nuclear codes to the Communist Chinese. And the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals in Richmond allowed the case to continue. This is a very similar case because it was denying First Amendment and Fourth Amendment rights to Siaka Massaquoi. And I have other clients too. But now let's go fast forward to the District of Columbia. The judges in the District of Columbia, highly politicized, political hacks of the highest order, in the most politicized place in the United States, in the most corrupt city in the United States. That's why they call it the swamp. They have been throwing peaceful protesters that were arrested and charged criminally in prison pending their trial. And many of the excuses used by these judges include, but are not limited to, as lawyers say, that because President Trump is out propagating the big lie that he won the election, this would incite these people to violence. Didn't matter whether they said that it was a fraudulent election or not, these defendants. The fact that Trump said it is enough to keep them in prison pending trial. Other judges have thrown people in prison pending trial based upon the fact that they accessed the internet and watched the symposium put on by Mike Lindell of MyPillow with regard to election irregularities and fraud. Now, whether you accept what Mike Lindell says or not, that's not a reason to throw somebody in jail. Just last week, a couple was kept in prison by a judge over there. We'll go through it, Reggie Wilkins, because he claims the judges have been receiving threats over what they're doing with regard to January 6th peaceful protesters. But none of the threats were made by this couple. They were there peacefully. He gave them the maximum sentence. You then have Chief Judge Burl Howe, who says this is the crime of the century of what occurred on January 6th, and has criticized vehemently the Justice Department for not charging the peaceful protesters with more crimes. Sometimes they're charged with a misdemeanor, which is, a trespass. She wants felonies. Okay. And then she makes statements to the effect that these people were trying to overthrow the government. Complete nonsense. Who is Burl Howe? Burl Howe was a top aide to Patrick Leahy, a political hack, ultra-leftist, now again, chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. That's how she got her job on the bench, political grease. You got another judge, Tanya Chutkan, not to be confused with Tanya Tucker, okay, who actually sang nice music. This one sings very evil music. And I've had her in my own cases, so I won't get into that here. She is a very angry Black woman who got onto the bench, in my opinion, through, in effect, affirmative action. She's not all that bright. I'm challenging some of the rulings she's made in cases that I'm involved in. But she actually went after one of her fellow white judges, an Irishman, a Trump appointee, Trevor McFadden, who I write about in my book. He's got his own problems. He's also intellectually corrupt at a minimum. But she went after him because in a sentencing hearing of one of the peaceful protesters, he asked the Justice Department, he says, I understand why these peaceful protesters are here, or why these January 6th defendants are here, but what did you ever do with regard to Black Lives Matter and the radical Blacks and others who destroyed the country last year, much of the country, in Portland, in Seattle, in Minneapolis, elsewhere? And, of course, the Justice Department had no response because it's now controlled by the Biden-Harris regime. But she then criticizes her own fellow white judge for making that statement and defends Black Lives Matter and the others. This is what you're dealing with, is that these judges wear their politics on their sleeve. They are violating their oath of office. The oath of office, I know it was sent to you. Let's put it up on the screen, Jason, what a federal judge's oath of office says. I believe my assistant sent it to you.
Here it is.
Okay. Read it for us, if you may, Maestro.
28 U.S.C. 453, Section 453, Oaths of Justices and Judges. Each justice or judge of the United States shall take the following oath or affirmation before performing the duties of his or her office.
Boy, that's sexist, isn't it? I guess we have to strike the oath of office because it says his.
Exactly. Yes. And you also need some alternate pronouns there.
I guess maybe that's the reason why Tanya Chutkan and Amy Berman Jackson, I'll get to her in a bit, and some of the other female judges like Catelli over there, who's the worst judge I've ever been in front of, Colleen Collard Catelli, totally dishonest to the core. I guess maybe they think it doesn't apply to them because it says his. Maybe that's their
Interesting
defense.
point.
But go ahead.
I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will administer justice without respect to persons and do equal right to the poor and to the rich, and that I will faithfully and impartially discharge and perform all the duties incumbent upon me as, whatever the role will be, under the Constitution and laws of the United States. So help me God.
Yeah, well, you can see there are several objectionable things to the left in this oath of office, so I guess that's why they don't respect it. in addition to the use of the word his, is the use of the word God, because most of these people are godless atheists, and they support abortion, of course. So I don't think God sanctions killing unborn children, but that's another story for another day. But you see the important phrase in there, without respect to persons. Okay, regardless of what your political ideology is, or your race or your ethnicity or your religion, you deserve to be treated equally. And these judges who are unaccountable, there for life, unelected, think they can do whatever they want. Now, here's the other, it's more than an outrage. It is tyranny in the highest order, is that many years ago, the Supreme Court granted immunity to itself and to lower court judges. They created immunity out of whole cloth, absolute immunity. You can't touch a judge, basically, legally, for what he or she does. You can go in and sue them on equitable grounds to try to get them to do the right thing. But even then, they won't listen to you. It's not qualified, by the way. That's inapplicable. It's absolute immunity that they gave themselves. And the bar associations do the same thing. The District of Columbia Bar Council think they can do whatever they want, violate any law, violate any rule of ethics, and they're immune. And the judges uphold that because they don't want to create a precedent that'll go back and bite them in the rear end. So this is the arrogance. And this is why, as it says in our Declaration of Independence, when in the course of human events, the sovereign, the rulers, no longer represent the people have a right under the laws of nature and nature's God, not man-made law, not the law of the king, not the law made by the US Congress, but the law of nature and nature's God. This is our founding fathers, to alter or abolish that government and to form a new government by and for the people with equal rights for everyone in pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. This is, again, what we're doing in other projects at Freedom Watch, but our Third Continental Congress, with our delegates, we are moving to declare independence, to form a new government, to take it out of Washington, to put it back to Philadelphia at Independence Hall or some other place other than Washington, which has grown so corrupt that you might as well just leave the criminals there on both Democrat and Republican to commit, and the judges to commit crimes against themselves. Let them have fun. But this is the problem, is that you cannot reach these judges through our current system. They're not accountable. If you file, for instance, an ethics complaint against them, it goes to their other judges, their friends in the courthouse that they eat lunch with, that they have breakfast with, that they socialize with. They circle the wagons and they protect each other. There is no recourse. And that's the reason for the citizens' grand jury, is that we, the American people, in a nonviolent way, a subchapter of my book is with regard to the Federal Judicial Hall of Shame, and I go through 10 judges in the first edition. I'm going through 17 in the second edition, is that they, frankly, do as they please. And we, the American people, have to hold them accountable. But the subtitle of that chapter on that book, the Federal Judicial Hall of Shame, is First to the Guillotines. I'm not advocating taking them to the guillotines or harming them at all, but I am advocating that they are the biggest threat to our democracy, because without federal judges that will stand in the stead for the American people and enforce the law without regard to persons, then we are living in a dictatorship. And that is why we, with our citizens' grand juries, are going to hold these judges accountable. And I'm going to start with Beryl Howell, the chief judge, because she's in charge. By the way, during the Mueller witch hunt, I was writing to her, asking her to prevent Mueller from these grand jury leaks, which were criminal. She was in charge of that grand jury, and it was harming people, smearing them, destroying their lives. She didn't even respond to my letter. Now, the irony is that in the past, although she's made very bad rulings, she's the judge that dismissed the case that I brought for Sheriff Arpaio to kill the 5 million illegal aliens that got amnesty by Obama. That case later, when we joined a case filed by 25 attorneys general in Texas, actually got rid of that amnesty. She said it was just a political matter, shirked her responsibility, violated her oath of office. We'll indict her for that too. But she is the one who is orchestrating with complete unanimity Democrat and Republican appointed judges. Clinton, Obama, Trump, and now Biden judges, in addition to judges that were even appointed and confirmed under President Reagan, George W. Bush, and the dad, H.W. Bush, all are taking virtually the same position, that what happened on January 6th was an attempted coup d'etat. These judges fear for their own lives. They're afraid to walk down the street in Washington, D.C. As Judge Reggie Jackson said, they're getting threats. And I don't advocate giving them threats, but remember what Jefferson said: when the people fear the government, there's tyranny. When the government fears the people, there's liberty. I'm not advocating that, but if they're feeling the heat, they should be convinced perhaps to take a different tack. And I'm not advocating threatening them. But that's why they take it so much to heart, because they believe they can't be touched. And when you walk into the courthouse in the District of Columbia, you've never seen security like this. You won't even see it at the CIA. You won't see it, in airports. They make you empty everything out, because these judges know that they are violating the law. They know that they've committed crimes, and they fear for their own lives. And that's why they are persecuting these January 6th peaceful protesters, to send a message to everybody that no one should question what they do, and no one should question the special interests that put them on the bench, and no one should question our so-called government. Now let's start with Judge Royce Lamberth, someone that I used to have a lot of respect for, someone who I considered my friend. After, I left Judicial Watch, I would go in and talk to him in chambers. We would, laugh and talk about, how the country can be resolved. I had no cases in front of him, so I could do that at the time. And he's gone native. I write about it in my book. He told a couple of these peaceful protesters that George Washington said that you should not challenge the established government. He took that completely out of context. That was during a time when we weren't doing too well after the revolution. We weren't getting things together fast enough. And several people like Alexander Hamilton, advocated going back to a limited monarchy with the king. It was Washington himself, with his fellow founding fathers, that waged a coup d'etat on King George III. It was Washington himself who did more than an insurrection, who caused a revolution, which, with God's divine providence, we won. So to quote George Washington, to say that people should not protest and they should not engage in civil disobedience by Lamberth, was an absolute abdication of his oath of office, and also, frankly, a disgrace. And I'm going to call it like I see it. And I've communicated with him since then. I've told him, you're maybe the one judge in that courthouse that can help change things. You may have, lying there somewhere in your soul, the ability to influence these other judges. And lo and behold, a few weeks ago, when these peaceful protesters, one or two of them, was denied medical care when they were in serious medical condition in a DC prison, he held the prison officials in civil contempt and then forwarded it on to the Biden-Harris Gestapo to do an investigation. This, unfortunately, was typical Judge Royce Lamberth, not to go the distance. And I write about that in my book, It Takes a Revolution. He could have held them in criminal contempt. Civil contempt means nothing. They just laugh at that. And to ask the Justice Department Civil Rights Division to investigate, that's like asking the Fox to investigate the Hen House massacre. Nothing will happen. So it made him look good. It was cosmetic, and that's what it was. Now, Lamberth's not as bad as the other judges over there. And some of these other judges, Amy Berman Jackson, Burl Howe, Randolph Moss, who paid $38,000, plus money bundled from Wilmer Hale, his former law firm where he was a partner with Robert Mueller to get his job on the bench. These people are absolute disgraces. So I want Jason to read, his eyes are better than mine at close range, some excerpts from the second edition of my book, which will be published in full in February of next year. I want you to go through the list and show some of these articles of what these judges have done, and then I'll comment on each of these judges, because I've had experience with them with other cases. And these people are despicable political hacks that could care less about the American people. They only care about themselves and the people that got them on the bench. That may sound like it's an exaggeration, but it's absolutely true. And it's why next week and in subsequent grand juries, we've already started the process to indict Attorney General Merrick Garland, along with, the previous indictees, Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, James Biden, Anthony Fauci, Mueller, is that we are going to seek their indictments and we're going to hold trials, and they can appear and they can defend themselves. And what's good for the goose is good for the gander. If they can, terrorize the American people with their actions, then the least we can do is hold them accountable under the laws of nature and nature's God, if not man-made law, because they have violated their oath of office and they've committed treason against the United States, in my opinion. And again, please do not threaten them, do not harm them, or anything to that effect. We'll deal with it in our legal system, and we'll turn that legal system against them, and we'll see if they like the same medicine that they dole out to the American people. It's time for them to feel the full weight of the law because they think they're immune. They're not immune under the laws of nature and nature's God, nor are they immune under man-made law, our own law, if they were to be equally applied to judges as they're applied to everybody else. And that's one of the reasons why, when we declare independence, I'm suggesting we fine-tune our Constitution and remove immunity for federal government officials and for judges, federal judges, make them accountable like we are when they intentionally try to harm people or act in a reckless and negligent manner. So, Jason, let's go through these little excerpts, keying in the articles that were written recently about their conduct. Of course, most of these articles are written approvingly by leftist publications like Politico, with political hack reporters, leftist political hack reporters, like a card-carrying member of the Jewish left. Remember, I'm Jewish, and so is Jason. But these people aren't really Jews, they're Marxists. Josh Gerstein, who I've actually sued because he defamed me, and a completely despicable human being. But let's go through it and look at some of these, what I wrote in draft in my second edition of the book. Now we're talking here about Judge Lamberth. Jason, if you'll read that.
Sure. This is a great preview, Larry, for people who are going to want to buy It Takes a Revolution, Forget the Scandal Industry, second edition. We're going to start with Judge Lamberth and this article in The Hill about
and the title's been changed. And I'd say at least half of the book is new material, updated for what's been going on, because it's much worse today than it was a year ago when it published on October 27th. It's now called It Takes a Counter-Revolution, Wake Up America, because we are in a counter-revolution. The left has seized total control over this country. We now have to take the country back and set it straight again. We don't need a new nation, we need a new government. And in addition, it says Wake Up America, because those people, particularly seniors who are in retirement, have to get out of retirement, young people, middle-aged people, they all have to play a role because our country's 90% gone. If we don't act now with God's grace, it's all gone. So anyway, go ahead, Jason. Let's let it roll.
Yeah, we'll start with your commentary here on Judge Lamberth's decision to hold. I believe it was actually the jail that was held, or the administrators of the jail that were held in civil contempt. This is Larry's words here. In my opinion, these federal judges fear for their own lives. But all of this notwithstanding, the sellout by Judge Lamberth was the proverbial final straw for me, underscoring why we need to radically change how we select and police federal judges, and why we need a viable means to remove them from the bench when they intentionally ignore and stray from the law.
And that final straw was when he dismissed a case brought by Sheriff Joe Arpaio, when Chris Cuomo of CNN, Huffington Post, and Rolling Stone defamed Sheriff Arpaio as a felon, which he was not a felon. In fact, one of them even said he was in prison when he wasn't. That when I saw him dismissing that, when other judges were letting cases go forward, when people were defamed as felons when they weren't, that was my final straw. Now we're getting into January 6th, which is bringing it forward a year, and Lamberth's behavior with regard to January 6th, which is almost as despicable.
And to make matters worse, with regard to January 6th, 2021, Lamberth has followed the lead of his other judicial brothers and sisters in the venomous federal court in the District of Columbia, also seeing fit to do a number on the peaceful protesters, save for one ruling where he held prison officials in civil contempt for denying medical care, but then referred that matter to the Biden Gestapo for investigation. Yet another cop-out.
Yeah, Gestapo, I'm referring to the Justice Department. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Go on.
If he had chosen not to protect the legal and prison establishment, he could have taken action that was not couched for public perception and held the prison officials in criminal contempt, throwing them in the slammer rather than referring them to the Department of Justice, which will bury the charges.
Injustice, yeah. Okay, so that's Lamberth. Now, he's not as bad as the rest. Okay, but the comment that you have to obey the established government because George Washington said you had to do it, that's obviously not what George Washington and our founding fathers did. They didn't obey the king. Okay, next.
One other interesting comment on that specific incident, Larry, a frequent guest here on Crowdsource the Truth, Joseph McBride, is one of our brothers-in-law in that he is defending several of the January 6th defendants, and he told a story to Tucker Carlson about, based on Judge Lamberth's order, they sent an investigation to the prison, and 24 hours before the investigation, the prison was scrubbed, repainted, lots of different black mold, rust, all these things were taken out, and the section that wasn't repaired was condemned. But the section that was repaired still holds the January 6th defendants.
Sounds like OJ, when he was indicted, they took the jurors out to view, his house, and he hung all these pictures of Martin Luther King and everybody else, to create what he never had on the wall before. So, this is the OJ approach to defense. Okay.
Now, with regard to Merrick Garland and Judge Lamberth, the New York Times published an article recently to which Larry's responding.
Well, read this next paragraph first.
Yeah, indeed. Lamberth was recently praised by Biden Attorney General Merrick Garland during a House Judiciary Committee hearing under questioning by Republican congressmen about the mistreatment of January 6th, 2021 peaceful protesters. The context: Garland used Lamberth to try to deflect from prison officials denying medical care to a wrongfully incarcerated pending trial. Seriously ill peaceful protester, but suggesting that Lamberth, who sent the man to jail,
you can see it's a draft. It's got some typos. Yeah,
that's all right. His meaningless referral of this criminal conduct to the DOJ's Civil Rights Division would solve the problem. However, sending the matter to the Biden-Harris Gestapo to investigate is like assigning the fox to look into his own henhouse massacre. Garland and Lamberth are indeed birds of a feather, even if coming from a different ideological persuasion. You cover my derriere, and I will cover yours, the primary modus operandi for sitting federal judges. Garland having been the chief judge on the federal appellate court in the swamp before Biden put him in charge of his Gestapo.
Okay. Let's go on to the next judge. We don't need to see the article with regard to Lamberth. Okay.
The next judge is one of your favorites, Larry, Amy Berman Jackson.
This is a judge, to give you background, who dismissed a case involving the fallen heroes, Ty Woods and Sean Smith, of their parents, Charles Woods and Pat Smith, that you might remember, particularly during the Republican convention. Pat Smith gave a speech, not because she was supporting the Republicans, but because she wanted people to know what was going on with Hillary Clinton. She dismissed that case that we brought against Hillary Clinton on the eve of Memorial Day. Why would you do that unless you were a vindictive witch? Okay. Grieving parents who had lost their sons, who were seeking justice because Hillary had, given up the coordinates of Ambassador Christopher, I forget his last name. Stevens, allowing the terrorists to move in and kill their sons. And so we sued her for wrongful death. We sued her for defamation because she called our clients liars when, she said it was just a bunch of Muslims walking through the woods one day. And in fact, it was Al-Qaeda. And she dismisses it, whether there was merit or not, and there wasn't merit to dismiss it. Why would you do it on the eve of Memorial Day in case you were trying to stick it to these grieving parents?
Veterans.
I mean, just unbelievably evil.
Yeah.
So read this.
Sure. Your commentary regarding Judge Amy Berman Jackson. Now in the aftermath of the January 6th, 2021 uprising, Berman Jackson is hard at work doing the bidding of the Biden-Harris regime and the left. She is hard at work throwing even peaceful protesters in prison after they've been charged and arrested by a corrupt Department of Justice, more akin to a Gestapo than our Justice Ministry, now run by a yes man, Attorney General Merrick Garland. Not coincidentally, previously a judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit. Garland's lackey is the disgraceful director of the FBI, Christopher Wray, a zero, nebbish in Yiddish, and a virtual legal chameleon who goes with the flow of whoever is in power. Here's where Berman Jackson proclaimed from the bench, in denying bail to one of the many peaceful protesters who were primarily charged with trespassing on the grounds of a Capitol building, which incidentally belongs to the American people. CNN, which I have come to rename the Communist News Network, reported, in presiding over the cases of hundreds of people accused of breaching the U.S. Capitol on January 6th in support of then-President Donald Trump, federal judges have not held back when describing the unprecedented nature of the events that day. You called yourself patriots, but that is not patriotism, Judge Amy Berman Jackson told defendant Carl Dresch earlier this month. Patriotism is loyalty to country, loyalty to the Constitution, not loyalty to a head of state, meaning then President Trump. That is the tyranny we rejected on July 4th. Earlier, in Dresch's case, Jackson had denied his bond, in part because Trump continues to spew the big lie that inspired the attack on a near daily basis, according to her May 5th opinion.
Yeah,
now,
there
Larry,
you have
this
it.
is an ironic. It's an ironic statement from Judge Jackson because she herself shows loyalty to Biden, Merrick Garland, these individuals, not the Constitution, as she tells these people they should to be patriots.
Well, that's right. And by the way, we're going to put up on the website, because, I mean, this second edition is still in progress. You can see there are a few typos. But we're going to put up on our website these articles that are written by these leftist publications extolling her virtues and the virtues of the other judges, including one that came out yesterday. We'll do that at the end about Burl Howe. And you'll see how the left is using these judges to further their own agenda to totally enslave the American people with their leftist dictatorship by quelling all dissent. This is where we are.
And we come to Burl Howell next. But wait, Judge Howell has again predictably reared her ugly leftist head in the aftermath of January 6, 2021. Following the lead of other previously fingered court jesters, including, you guessed it, Judge Catelli, on the federal bench in the swamp.
That's Colleen Catelli. She won the first award. She was the first for our Federal Judicial Hall of Shame. She won hands down, but we'll get to her later. Okay, continue.
I have a nominee we can discuss after the show. Lecturing even the Biden-Harris Gestapo at the Justice Department that the primarily trespass charges leveled against the peaceful protesters were too lenient, arguing for more felony indictments as opposed to misdemeanor charges, Judge Howell ranted. This is a puzzle for this petty offense charge. It's to parading, demonstrating, or picketing. Demonstrating is typically about something. It's parading about something. So there you have it. Now even simple protesting is a felony, especially when the corrupt swamp establishment's ox is being held to peacefully account. Mussolini would be proud. Now, Larry, let me ask you something before we go on to the next comment here. Is it okay for a judge to apply their opinion that stronger charges? I mean, is that within the judge's purview to do that? Say these charges aren't strong enough, I'm adding charges, or I want additional charges?
Well, they can do that, but it's generally inappropriate for them to do that. They can do that. It'll occur in sentencing. They may not accept a proposed sentence by the Justice Department. But
That's
here we
different than
haven't
a charge,
even,
isn't it?
here we haven't even gotten to that point because there was no trial, there was no conviction. So yes,
But wait, you just said something important. So let's say the sentencing guidelines for a particular crime, the judge feels are too low given the egregious nature of a crime. But can the judge add other charges? I understand that they can go beyond the sentencing guidelines.
She can't. But here's another key distinction why this is totally improper, unethical, is that these protesters haven't been charged with anything. I mean, they haven't been tried and convicted, most of them. Okay, they haven't had their due process yet. So we don't know that they've even committed any crimes.
Done it. Right.
Yeah. So she's stiff-arming what is already a Gestapo. I think I just lost.
You're still here.
Screen went off.
Oh. Well, whoops, now you're gone. Okay, wait a minute. We lost Larry there. Maybe he's got an internet problem. Stand by, everyone. We'll see if we can get Larry back on. We've got some more commentary here. Why don't I begin by reading Larry's comments about Judge Randolph Moss, and we'll wait and see if Larry can reconnect to the conference. With regard to Judge Moss, Larry's new book, okay, he's going to come in by phone. All right, so we'll have Larry on phone in just a moment, and we'll wait for him to do that. Don't forget, you can support Crowdsource the Truth by going to subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth, or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, and becoming a sponsor. You'll get access to sponsor-exclusive content, and you help keep the Citizens Grand Juries and other shows going. Larry, you're back.
Back, Jason. I lost you because my computer died, and I forgot the charger this morning. So I'll do it off my... Okay.
No problem. So let's resume with your commentary here about Randolph Moss.
Yes.
Let's start with Judge Randolph Moss, a man who paid handsomely, directly and indirectly, through his law firm Wilmer Hale, which we should add, Larry, am I correct? Robert Mueller is a partner at Wilmer Hale.
That's correct. He was. So was Jeannie Rhee, okay, who was also one of the prosecutors in Mueller's witch hunt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So he paid.
And they bundled a lot of money in addition to the $38,000 that Moss gave to Democrats for him to ascend to the bench. Not ascend, like Jesus, but ascend like Randolph Moss.
Yes, ascend like Moss. We've got someone else here we'll get to them in just a moment. So Moss paid directly and indirectly through his law firm Wilmer Hale with campaign contributions to Obama and other Democrats to get his judicial appointment, as will be discussed as well later. As gleefully reported by the leftist legal reporter of the leftist publication Politico, Josh Gerstein. A federal judge has handed down the first felony sentence in the January 6th storming of the U.S. Capitol, sending a Tampa man to prison for 8 months for obstructing Congress's efforts to tabulate and certify the electoral vote. The sentence, Paul Hodgkins, 38, he received Monday for marching into the Senate floor with a Trump flag during the chaotic Capitol takeover, was less than half of what prosecutors recommended. But U.S. District Judge Randolph Moss also turned down the defense's request that Hodgkins get no prison time. As he imposed the sentence, Moss sent a profound and dangerous message by raising the Trump flag by the Senate dais at the hour members of Congress were supposed to be confirming President Joe Biden's victory. The symbolism of this act is unmistakable, the judge said. In that act, he captured the threat to democracy that we all witnessed that day. Stunning words, Larry.
Well, yeah, he carried a Trump flag. That was his crime. And what they're doing now, in conjunction, because they're working as Tweedledee, Tweedledum, the Gestapo at the Justice Department under Biden, Harris, and these judges, is they're bludgeoning these people into pleading guilty, because if not, they'll do many years in prison. So they're making them walk the plank. It's almost like a terrorist, frankly, who makes you confess that the United States is the great Satan, an Islamic terrorist. That's what they're doing. And
it's extortion by definition, isn't it, Larry?
Right. So these people all of a sudden, are being forced to eschew, their values and their belief that they had a right to peacefully protest. And, even if it wasn't a peaceful protest, I got to tell you something. Jefferson would have been the first one into the Capitol on January 6th. Jefferson advocated violence, under these circumstances. I'm not advocating violence, but Jefferson did. And, so consequently, when you push people up against a wall, when you push them to the limit, you don't expect them to react. So these people are being forced to make confessions. It reminds me of the Iranian regime. You have to confess that you're a spy from the United States, or you're going to get death. Instead, you'll just have to go to Ivan prison and get tortured. I know I'm exaggerating a little bit here, but
not that much.
It's the American equivalent of that. And so anyway, let's get on to Thomas Hogan. He's a Reagan appointee, another piece of work.
Judge Thomas Hogan, a Reagan appointee, like anti-Semite Judge William Keller, goes to show again that presidents generally do not even know who they have appointed to the bench. Only that his advisors, following the financial and other grease applied by lobbyists and other special interests, have put the name of the jurist in front of the fearless leader, be rewarded with an appointment. As reported by the Washington Post with regard to yet another peaceful protester on January 6, 2021, Hogan said he seriously considered jailing Jessica Bussell because her social media posts calling January 6 participants patriots were so inaccurate and misguided. Patriots are not the ones who attack operations of Congress or attempt to stop elected lawmakers in both parties from performing their duties, Hogan said. That is revolution, not patriotism. That's only half right, Judge Hogan. In this circumstance, where we the people have seen and been forced to endure the rank corruption in all three branches of government, not just in Congress, but in your court, what happened on January 6, 2021 is largely both patriotism and revolution. And this patriotic event, like the hostilities which broke out at Lexington and Concord in the months leading up to July 4th, 1776, and the signing of the Declaration of Independence, symbolizes the beginning of the Second American Revolution. Take it or leave it. You asked for it, you got it, Toyota, Larry. Another one of your favorites.
Yeah.
Like King George III, Hogan and his fellow tyrannical witches and warlocks, particularly on the District of Columbia federal bench, these despots cannot tolerate the people's dissent in defiance of their establishment masters, even in the form of First Amendment protected social media posts. With this judicial arrogance and complicity within the elitist establishment ruling class, what now is to come will surely be much more than dissent. Stay tuned, federal judges. It's shocking, Larry, that a judge would make a statement that someone deserves a prison sentence for something posted on Twitter.
Well, and it's also in the Federal Judicial Code of Conduct, which they really don't give much credence to anyway. They don't obey it. In fact, the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court said that Supreme Court justices don't even have to adhere to the Federal Judicial Code of Conduct. Believe it or not, Roberts said it may be unconstitutional. But it says that you're not to engage in politics on the federal bench. And that's what exactly this is. It's more than politics. It's tyranny.
Where is that said?
In the Judicial Code of Conduct.
Huh. I'll have to take a look at that.
I know you've got some cases. Take a close look at it. You've got a real piece of work up there in New York. We'll talk about that on another show. Okay.
Let's talk about Judge Carl Nichols.
Oh, he's
in the fourth
favorite, quote unquote. You go ahead.
In the forthcoming book, Larry says, U.S. Judge Carl Nichols ordered Garrett Miller to remain jailed pending trial, concluding the Dallas man poses a danger to the community. Miller didn't give a statement to the law enforcement officers who arrested him at his home 2 weeks after the riots, prosecutors said, but they noted he was wearing a T-shirt that had a photograph of former President Donald Trump, and it said, "Take America Back." And I was there, Washington, D.C., January 6, 2021. Prosecutors presented a photograph of Miller wearing the shirt during an earlier hearing for his case and cited it in a court filing seeking his pretrial detention. Assistant U.S. Attorney Elizabeth Kelly said Miller has shown a troubling lack of respect for any authority. Interesting. Let's roll into Judge.
Yeah, let's make this point too. You know, who is Elizabeth? What's her name again? This U.S. attorney, assistant U.S. attorney.
Elizabeth Kelly.
Kelly. Lack of respect. Okay, that's the standard for throwing somebody in prison. Lack of respect. These people deserve no respect. No respect. These judges deserve none. And the Biden-Harris Justice Department, run by these hacks, not, you know, good people in the FBI that are forced to do what they have to do because they're line agents. I mean, there's some that are bad too, believe it or not. But I've represented FBI agents, you know, who don't agree with this, and I've talked to them. They're against what's going on. But who is she to say that you should be prosecuted because of lack of respect? These people deserve no respect. And with regard to, you know, the fact that this defendant was wearing a T-shirt, you know what they seized from Siaka Massaquoi, my client? His MAGA hat. That's evidence. Wow. Evidence. His MAGA hat. Quote unquote evidence.
Well, one guy, they took a Capitol Lego set. So I don't know if major military strategists use Legos to plan their insurrection, and the set wasn't even constructed, Larry, so that's an interesting point. Let's speak about Judge Tanya Chutkan, another federal jurist I have had the pleasure to personally speak with during the course of the Imran Awan trial. Yeah. Larry says,
pleasure, I would say. Yeah.
But Chutkan, notwithstanding my travails before her, also showed her colors in a criminal case involving a peaceful protester on January 6, 2021. There, this one angry black jurist who apparently believes in black privilege as opposed to equal justice, even went after one of her compromised colleagues on the federal bench, Trevor McFadden, a white Irish-American Trump appointee who, as chronicled below, has his own problems. As happily reported again by leftist reporter Josh Gerstein of Politico, federal judges are wrestling with a dilemma as dozens of cases stemming from the Capitol riot move toward sentencing. Should they throw the book at everyone who streamed into the building on January 6th, or just those who committed violence and destruction? Many of the judges on D.C.'s federal bench have advocated for stiff sentences in most cases on the grounds that breaching the Capitol was an unconscionable crime against American democracy. And they've overwhelmingly rejected comparisons lodged by accused rioters that the violence of January 6th is akin to the unrest that plagued Portland, Oregon, and other American cities alongside last year's racial justice protests. The dispute flared anew on Monday when Judge Tanya Chutkan pointedly rejected her own colleague's comparison between the January 6th mob and the rioters who exploited Black Lives Matter demonstrations last year. Some have compared what took place on January 6th with other protests that took place throughout the country through the past year and have suggested that the Capitol rioters are being treated unfairly. Chutkan said during a sentencing hearing, "I flatly disagree." Although she did not mention any names, it seemed unthinkable that Chutkan was responding nearly point by point to the analysis of Judge Trevor McFadden, who serves alongside her on the U.S. District Court in Washington, D.C., where more than 600 defendants are facing charges for their roles in the Capitol attack. Chutkan's venomous self simply cannot resist. This radical black and feminist Obama-appointed judge apparently relishes even stoking hateful racial discord and division with a white Trump appointee on her own federal bench. There truly is no honor among federal judicial miscreants, whether they are black, beige, white, yellow, or otherwise, Larry.
Yeah, yellow is a good word. I think they're all yellow because they have no courage. They have no courage to stand up for the American people. They stand up for themselves. And that's why Jefferson said they would become despots and tyrants. Let's read the next one. Do we have another one?
That was the last one on today's list,
well,
Larry.
There's more, and there's Judge
we're almost out of
Colleen
time for today, but we can revisit that, of course.
Well, we will. Let's sum it up because this is the beginning of holding the judiciary accountable. Believe me, they'll retaliate against me for doing this. But, at this point, Jason, I got to tell you, the only legal system the American people have is their own, under the laws of nature and nature's God. And we cannot be afraid. We have to do what we have to do. We will seek their indictment. We will try them. We will sentence them. We will seek to have it carried out by the police and the military. These federal judges who were put there to protect us, not to terrorize us, are our most important public servants in principle. There are a few good ones in the United States. Currently, I can't think of any. The only one, frankly, who I know of, who stood up for the people in any major way, Judge Stanley Sporkin, also of that court, is now sadly dead. He's deceased. He died last year at the age of 88. But there currently are none that I know of that will stand up for the American people, because how do they get to be judges? Basically, they get to be judges by kissing, and excuse the French, the asses of the establishment with political campaign contributions and other forms of grease of people that want them on the bench, and then they have to return the favor. And in terms of the judges in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, they want to be part of the club. They want to go to the parties of Georgetown. They socialize, in lunchrooms and dinner rooms and parties throughout. They think they're better than the rest of us. They think they know better, and they fear for their own lives. Washington, D.C. has become a fortress. You remember that they circled the Capitol with tens of thousands of military leaders. That's ironic, because if anybody's going to remove them, it's the military, and they kept them away. It was basically just to say to others to stay away, but they actually feared the military that they put there. And I firmly believe, Jason, that we are at a point, and I'm not advocating a coup d'etat, but I wouldn't be surprised if in the near or medium future, the military doesn't go to the White House until Biden and Harris, their time is up. And here's the thing I want to emphasize as well, because I've been doing it in our podcast the last few days. The past is a prologue. The Republicans are crowing about their great victory, in Virginia. If you couldn't beat Terry McAuliffe, a complete criminal who I sued and deposed, someone who laundered money for the Clintons illegally, laundered it for McCabe's wife when she was running, in Virginia for something. I think it was $500,000. A complete
1.2 million was reported.
A complete utter sleazeball. If you couldn't beat him, you couldn't beat, your dog running for. And I'd vote for my dog over I would any of these people. Believe me. The point is this: the Republicans have had control of all three branches of government before. When they had control, they did little to nothing. They didn't reform Obamacare. They didn't balance the budget. They knew that Afghanistan would turn into a debacle, and they wanted it to happen. And as I'm on today, I'm looking at Lindsey Graham in front of me on the TV in my office, and he's smiling, about what's going on with, the Build Back Better, a budget-busting communist proposal to put everybody on welfare virtually. This is who the Republican Party is. And if the American people think they can rock back and wait for the Republican Party to come to their defense, forget it. What have they done? The reason we have Biden and Harris is because of the Republican Party. The Republican Party even tried to destroy Trump. He surmounted that for a while, but they eventually got him too. His own vice president sold him out, Mike Pence. So this is what we're talking about here. Do not think that the Republicans are our answer. And if you think that you can do nothing because the Republicans are going to save you, I say head for the hills and go to another country quickly, because these people are just the flip side of the Democrats. They're not as evil as the Democrats. They simply rake in money through a racketeering enterprise. How many emails do you get every single day asking for money? They acquire power. They go on Fox News to do all of this. And when they get elected, they do nothing. They're part of the entire corrupt establishment. And what have they done about the federal judges? I went to visit with Judiciary Committee members, Steve King and others, on several occasions over the last several years with judges who are corrupt. I've asked them to take action. I asked them to start an investigation. I asked them to move to impeachment. They did nothing. Steve King told me that was going to be the case. Of course, he's no longer in Congress. They branded him as a racist. So, and I don't find him to be a racist.
What do you mean he told you that, Larry? He told you that that's what he intended to do, or he told you that out of frustration?
He told me out of frustration that Goodlatte, who was the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, wasn't worth, excuse the French, shit. Okay, that they weren't going to do anything. And that's been true of all of them, not just Goodlatte. But Goodlatte would go on TV, you know, and he would rail and he would play the same game as Senator Tom Cotton or Jim Jordan, you know, with the rolled up sleeves, or, you know, the rest of them that are big tough guys but never do anything. You see? And so do not think that the Republicans winning in Virginia is going to change anything. That was not a vote for the Republicans. That was a vote against Biden, the Biden-Harris regime. And if you want to save this country, invoking divine providence of the Father and the Son, and if you're Jewish, of God, you just call him God. Remember, Jesus was a rabbi, so I think we can use both. Then you better do it for yourselves. And that's why I say these citizens' grand juries are important. Our Third Continental Congress, we need to declare independence. We form a new government. We put up new leaders. We fine-tune the Constitution, and I talk about that in the second edition of my book, How We Do It, including, you know, removing immunity for judges and federal government workers. We need to do it ourselves. And if do not rock back and wait for 2022, even if they do reclaim control of the House of Representatives and the Senate, it'll be more of the same. The past is a prologue, and if you wait that long, there'll be no country left at all. So this is where we are right now. It's urgent. Fox News plays its game, and all of a sudden it's, you know, it's back as the official press organ of the Republican Party. CNN, the communist news network, is the official press organ of the Democratic Party. They play their game. They play off of each other. It's like the Anti-Defamation League playing off of Louis Farrakhan. They both love each other because it lets them raise money. But in fact, they're both flip sides of the same coin. So this is where we are, Jason. And that's why these citizens' grand juries are important. Our Third Continental Congresses are important. And we need to rise up. And one last point for people who are watching. Mark Levin, who I listen to sometimes when I'm in the car, I think Mark's very bright. I've known him for a long time. He never really wanted to do anything together because he felt jealous of me at Judicial Watch because we stole his thunder at the time. But he wrote a book, American Marxism. He didn't tell us anything we already didn't know. He sold over 1 million copies because he promotes it every 2 minutes on his radio show, which, you know, has a national reach. His solution is protest and boycott and go to school board meetings. That ain't going to do it. That is no solution at all. I mean, that's good to raise the issue, to educate. I agree. But now we have to take the final step. We have to take risks like our founding fathers did. They risked their lives and pledged their fortunes in sacred honor to form a new nation. Mark is taking no risks. He's selling a lot of books. That's good for him, but it doesn't do anything. And the Republican Party is the same way, is that they're just in it for themselves. And that's why we, the American people, yes, we have to be in it for ourselves, but we have to take risks and we cannot be afraid. And therefore, it's time to declare independence. It's time to fine-tune the Constitution, to remove immunity, to require the judges be elected, and several other suggestions I have, like putting a right to life explicitly in the Constitution. And then ask yourself this question. Do you think God's just sitting around idly and watching everything that goes on? Do you think God is just watching hundreds of millions of babies be killed in the mother's womb, or that, you know, his concept of man and woman being defiled in the schools when the schools push homosexuality, transgenderism, and all kinds of stuff. I mean, I heard on NPR just a few weeks ago, there was a lesbian on with a transgender saying, if your kid comes home from school and says he wants to be transgender, take him to get an operation and Obamacare will pay for it. I mean, can you believe it? This is what kids are being taught. And so I think that God is telling us, he's sending us a message with COVID-19, like he did the Egyptians when he let our people go with plagues, killing the firstborn son of every Egyptian family. I think he's saying, either you shape up or I'm going to make sure you're going to ship out. So it's time for the American people, if you believe in God, rather than just giving lip service by going to church or synagogue, if you believe in God, then you believe in taking action. And in the old book of Isaiah, that applies to both Jews and Christians. It says that God will restore the tarnished city to the faithful city through the counselors and judges, lawyers and judges. Right now, our legal profession is corrupt to the core. And if we're going to restore this nation to that faithful sitting on a hill that God wanted and that Ronald Reagan tried to do, and largely did when he was president, our only real president, in my opinion, in modern history, then we better rise up ourselves and not depend on the Republican Party, which is in it and has become a simple racketeering enterprise to acquire more power and more money. That's my piece for today, Jason. We'll be back next week,
Larry,
and we will proceeding with the indictments of these judges and other judges.
And I want to remind our viewers that they can support Freedom Watch and the Citizens Grand Juries by going to freedomwatchusa.org. People can click on the red donate button and choose a tax-deductible contribution amount that suits their budget. You can also click on the donate button here next to Larry's book, and you're going to get a copy of It Takes a Revolution, Forget the Scandal Industry. Contribution of $50 or more gets you a copy of the book. And of course, it is a tax-deductible contribution. It helps Larry and his team at Freedom Watch keep these efforts going. I want to remind people they can support Crowdsource the Truth by going to subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth and becoming a sponsor. Larry will be back next week. Thank you, jurors. And